Thank you everyone for joining us. This is our 6th Engineering in Life presentation. These presentations are opportunities for working engineers to talk about their careers or their paths up to their current career. We hope that you will continue to join us in future presentations. And if you find this to be useful to you or entertaining, we hope that you tell your friends about this session that we have here and let them know that this is typically a monthly thing that we try to do here on the server. This session is being recorded. A link of the video will be shared in our announcements channel when that gets posted onto our YouTube channel. If you'd like to see our YouTube channel, you can go into any chat and you can type *YouTube, which I will be doing in the large meeting room, and a bot will give you a link. If you have any questions at any time, you can type them into a thread found in the large meeting room chat room. Please keep other discussion out of that thread, and please make sure your questions go into that thread. That is where we will be looking at the end of the presentation for our Q&A session. Let's see, everyone is welcome to share their story in a presentation like this. If you think you might like to give a presentation, you can message myself or Ada or anyone with an event coordinator role, and we can see what topic you might like to cover and when you might be available to present. With all that said, I'd like to toss it over to our presenter today, Evan, and you are free to take the floor.
Cool. Thanks, Chase. Hey, everybody. My name's Evan. I've been involved in the STEM Network Discord a little bit for the past year, and I have been out of school for about 5 years working at SpaceX, and I was invited to share my experiences and sort of my path from university up through work in industry. So I'm going to talk a little bit and hopefully I'll get some questions. So I'm just going to talk about sort of my background, how I went from undergrad electrical engineering through getting an internship and working full time. Also, shout out to my wonderful wife, Emily, who invited me into doing this presentation. So a little bit background about myself. I've gotten a few questions from people in the Discord about sort of what my path through education was, getting an internship and going full time. So I started out with a bachelor's in electrical engineering at University of Maryland. I did a minor in computer science because honestly I wasn't really sure which path I wanted to go down. So I thought, well, at least I'll get some credits in each one and I can figure out my path after my first year. Right after that, a few people asked me what coursework did I take in electrical engineering that I actually used working full time in electrical engineering. Honestly, it was a little bit of everything. The one course that stood out the most was actually a first year freshman course that I took that it's called Intro to Engineering Design, which dumped a group of 10 students into a project with no experience or no prior knowledge of engineering, and then they were told to go make a hovercraft that can navigate a course. I thought that was sort of the most relevant for working full time, being able to take on a project without really knowing what you're doing and learning on the job. One of the most important decisions I made in my experience at university was joining a team-based engineering project early on. So this was probably the most critical decision I made when I was a student, was joining our school's Formula SAE team, which I'm sure a lot of people have heard of it, but for people who haven't, it's a student engineering team where you basically design and build a race car, all undergrad students trying to figure it out as you go, and then you race the cars all together in an annual competition at the end of the year. So in this case, Formula SAE was offered at our school mostly for third and fourth year students. It was offered as a course, but also as an extracurricular activity. So I actually joined my first year which wasn't really recommended for students to do because they thought, oh, you should probably have some actual like experience before you like try to join this team. So I just kind of kept showing up to meetings and started getting more and more responsibility. I think the first few weeks I just showed up and like swept the floor and helped clean up after other people because I had no idea what was going on. I remember like taking a ton of notes of trying to learn like how the heck does a race car work? How do you design a suspension? Since I was electrical, I pitched in like working on wiring harness designs. One of my first projects was making like a PIC-based microcontroller CAN bus module to relay telemetry from race car sensors all the way through to a display. And the second year, I took on more responsibility and like led the electrical team entirely as a sophomore. So I'd say this was as important or more important than any of the courses that I took at university. I probably spent just as much time working on this race car as I did taking all these courses. So one of the things that was really important to me was being able to go from a design on paper to actually building something with my hands. So at the bottom, I just have a few photos of like some of the work that I did, which was basically figuring out how do you wire up a car and how do you design a wire harness that can actually like physically fit to the frame, connect all the sensors up to the engine control unit, have wheel speed sensors for each wheel, connected to a display and show like RPM, oil pressure, oil temp, coolant temp to the driver. And actually, these photos, I basically included this as like a portfolio from an application that I submitted when I applied for an internship at SpaceX during my third year. And I was fortunate enough to talk to a recruiter in person. I basically showed him these photos, and this was essentially like what got me an internship offer. So if anything, what I learned is having really hands-on team-based engineering experience was most important for me at school. And being able to understand how a system works and being able to build it from like the ground up was really important to me. So another thing I get asked a lot is when you're a university student and you're applying for internships, how do you make an application really stand out? It's kind of like three things that I think of. One is do cool projects on a team. So show that you can take on responsibility and actually physically build something with other people, because that sort of replicates like the most of like an actual job environment. So there's tons of university programs out there that like offer this experience. I like highly recommend joining one, regardless of like what year in school you are. Formula SAE is a big one. Solar car is another. Some schools have like underwater robotics or terrestrial robotics projects. There's also like obviously rocketry groups and clubs are like really popular, especially for SpaceX applications. And then another thing that is important is being able to describe it well in an application or in person. One of the things that's really awesome about the STEM Network Discord is that there's like tons of resources here, like the resume review channel, where people will look at your resume and will try to like give you feedback of how you can like improve it and make it better. And then the next step is once you actually have that application, or you're able to like get somebody working at these companies to look at your work, is be able to back it up and explain actually how it works. So for example, that like wire harness that I showed, be able to explain like how all of the electrical signals are translated from sensors read back through the engine control unit, and like why is that important to the car. I also just put in the basic requirement or the preferred qualifications that SpaceX lists for the internships. And if you read them, they're actually pretty straightforward. One is like GPA. They want people to show that they have some technical competence. And then the second and last bullets are the most important, and you can knock these out with a university program like FSAE. So one is be able to talk to people and work with other people. It's like, can you get along with other human beings? Third and fourth, can you use Windows? Can you use Microsoft Office, which I think everybody can get through when they're in university. And then the last one is like, I think the most important part, which is that actual hands-on experience. And one of the things that's important with this is it doesn't even have to be that technically complicated. Most of the electronics in your car are not that difficult to understand. Like a oil pressure sensor might be 0 to 5 volts, and it's just linear with voltage to oil pressure. And you don't even really need a university degree to understand how that works. But if you can show how, okay, well, I had this copper wire, I crimped it on both ends, I connected from the sensor to the ECU, and now the driver's able to use that and understand, like, if they have an oil leak, that is like way more powerful than being able to show, like, theoretically on paper how something works. And I've seen that translates the best to actual job experience, because most of my experience has been, it doesn't really matter, the technical difficulty is not the hard part, it is the execution and working with other people. So next, I was just going to talk generally about sort of what working in industry has been like, what it's been like for me at SpaceX. For anybody who's worked on some of these engineering university teams, I kind of describe working at SpaceX as like those teams, but people who work on it full-time and with a lot more money. Besides that, there's a huge part of it is people are still trying to figure things out on their own and may not even know the answers before they jump into it. So personally, I worked on avionics hardware development for Falcon and Dragon for my first 2 or 3 years there. One of the first circuit boards that I actually designed was on Crew Dragon, and a big part of my job was just learning how these things work as I go. Another thing that was really important was learning how to work in a really high stress environment with tight deadlines. The launch cadence at SpaceX actually drives all of the milestones and deadlines that you have. So they're not things that you can really push out. So if you have a project deadline there, you have to meet it. And if you don't, then it costs the company, millions of dollars a day for every day that you actually slip. I found that people are very human there, and they understand that you have that you're like working in these really high stress scenarios. And the best way that I've learned to deal with that is like relying on other people and learning to ask for help. And I mentioned my wife, Emily. She also works for an aerospace company, but they have like a totally different culture than SpaceX. They're much more bureaucratic, much more like legacy heritage aerospace. And it's interesting seeing like the differences between her industry and working at SpaceX. We might do something in a few weeks or a few months that would take them years. So I would highly recommend that if you are working in a company that you feel like is going too slow, and it's sort of like stifling how fast you can execute projects if you feel like it's going too slowly, try to jump around to different roles and find a fit that you like. Personally, SpaceX was almost too fast for me. I wanted something that was a little bit slower, that wasn't as sort of intense and high stress. So there's kind of like a gray scale of maybe SpaceX is on one end and legacy aerospace companies on the other, and there are tons of companies in between that have different fits for different people. So I know I kind of spoke pretty generally about that. So I'm hoping people just have questions that they can follow up with. And like, I'm just glad to talk generally about like what my experience was like.
Awesome. Well, thank you, Evan. See, we do have a couple questions already. Skunkamunka asked, how many jobs did you apply for before getting your SpaceX offer?
I think I applied for about 15 internships. And what's funny is SpaceX was the only one that actually got back to me. And I actually sort of got the internship almost by chance. I had applied online, and this was like in the fall of my third year, right before, right while you're trying to like get through the internship season. And I didn't hear back for a couple months until finally I talked to a recruiter in person in like February when SpaceX came to our campus and did like they like rent out a lecture room and 200 people come and give them their resumes. Actually, I went to the thing with a friend because he was like, "Oh, I really want to work for this company. This is awesome." And I didn't even bring my resume, and I saw they're handing them out. So I remember running back to my dorm, printing off a resume, coming back to it. I was the last person in the line. Talked to the recruiter, gave me a resume, and was like, "Oh, I've also been working on this Firmware project. My wire harness is over in the garage. Why don't you guys come by and check it out?" About 2 hours later, I got an email from SpaceX saying that my application had been rejected. And it's like, oh man, I must have done such a crappy job if it took them 2 hours to get back to me. But it turns out that my online application was rejected, but the in-person recruiter forwarded my resume to an actual manager at SpaceX, and then also was able to bring back that like experience of being like, okay, this person actually built something with their hands in their free time. They're motivated, and then that's how I got the offer. But I had applied to like Microsoft, Boeing, NASA applications, Amazon, Apple, a ton of different tech companies, and basically got ghosted by all of them. But what did it for me was talking to somebody in person.
Awesome. And did they ever swing by to see your harness?
Yeah, they did. Yeah, they came by the next day. They were doing tours of like all the labs. A lot of recruiters do that because it's much like less intense way of meeting people than when they're in like a suit and tie and they're like in a line. They talk to a recruiter for 2 minutes. It's a lot more enjoyable when you can actually talk to somebody in a lab when they're just wearing like cargo shorts and a t-shirt.
Yeah, it sounds like it. Were they going to swing by your lab anyway, or did they specifically stop by at least the harness area because you pointed out to them?
They were going to come by anyway. Okay. But thankfully they mentioned it to me because I had no idea. So I was like, oh crap, I better clean up the lab a little bit and make it look a little bit more presentable.
Yeah. I'm sure anyone would appreciate that kind of heads up. Let's see, Mustang Steve asked, do you think there is a disconnect with what industry needs from new engineers versus what the colleges are outputting? And if there is an imbalance between the two, do you have any thoughts on how that can be fixed?
That's a good question. The classes I've taken that have been most relevant are the team-based ones, where you have to like physically build something and deliver it, and you have to do it to a deadline, and you're working with other people. And there might have been only like 2 or 3 classes that were like that. It's kind of tricky because on one hand, you want people to have to like work with other human beings. I'd say like half the challenges of my job were communication, even if it was something really technically challenging, like, oh, how do I like design these like controlled impedance traces on a circuit board? Half the problem there is being able to communicate with the PCB layout person to like describe like, okay, this is the impedance, this is where they have to route, these are my constraints. And a lot of that's just like, can you talk to another person? So on one hand, I kind of wish that there were more like team-based projects. On the other hand, there's kind of feels like 20% of every class is relevant at some point in my career. Even if it was just like being able to understand a concept or like a key phrase or knowing what book to look it up in. So if there's anything different, I mean, I would push for more universities that do co-op programs. There's some schools that do 5 or 6 year degrees and then have a mandatory like 1 year co-op in between. And I would also push for more of those like team-based projects where you're working an entire semester to make something, whether it's like a terrestrial rover, hovercraft, like I mentioned, something like the Formula SE project. Even if it's something like can you move a servo, or can you spin a motor, or can you design like a simple chassis, or can you design a suspension? Even if it's something that you could probably like learn yourself on Google, can you do it with another person?
Yeah, I think I personally would agree with that. I know you mentioned co-ops. The school I went to really pushed co-ops. It wasn't mandatory, but it's all anyone ever talked about in terms of, what do you recommend I do? Co-op if you haven't already. It's always the answer. And that was kind of a different industry that I was hearing it from, but the professors giving that sort of advice were all people from industry, and they themselves had been in hiring positions and knew that that kind of experience is very valuable.
Yeah, I was in a hiring role, sort of like a panel reviewer at SpaceX, and one of the more important things we looked for was like internship experience, being able to work with the team. Less relevant was like how many years did it take to graduate, or how old are you, or even necessarily like what your GPA was. I know that SpaceX puts like the GPA 3.5 on there, but I never really cared that much about it. I remember like a lot of students that I was with, they were really stressing over how do I cram this degree into 4 years or 5 years. And looking back at it, like I almost feel like if you can afford it, like take more time and do more of those projects.
You mentioned that 3.5 GPA. If I remember correctly, you had listed 3.3 on one of your slides. Was that just not a requirement that was in place when you started working for them, or did they kind of look around that with your internship experience? Do you know why that is?
That's a good question. I don't know. I think I probably had like a 3.4 or 3.5 when I had applied, and then probably dropped a bit after I had the internship. I was like, well, I don't really care about my classes anymore. I already have a job lined up.
Yeah, that does happen sometimes. But you're getting that real good experience anyway, so it works out.
I think that's probably what they do for the general applications. Maybe there's some like screen setup at the beginning. This is just conjecture. I don't actually know what the filtering process is like.
Yeah,
but
okay.
I don't imagine it's like a super hard requirement.
Okay. Let's see. Skunkamunka asks, what did you produce for your final year capstone?
My capstone, it was an electrical engineering project. I made a STM32 microcontroller board, which is like a Cortex M4 processor, just talking to a CMOS image sensor, taking images. And I forget like what application rationale I had for it, but it was basically making this Cortex M4 circuit board, hooking it up to an image sensor, and then writing some low-level firmware with like a CMSIS driver to pull image frames off the microprocessor. Wasn't a terribly involved capstone project. I don't think we had like a very formal capstone. It wasn't even like a team-based one.
Oh, so it was just an individual project?
Yeah, just an individual project. Looking back was kind of weird for a capstone.
Let's see. Ada asks, what kind of project in school or outside of school should someone who is interested in aerospace do to be more outstanding from other applicants if they're interested in SpaceX? I guess obviously the formula team worked out for you. Is there anything that you might recommend as an alternative, or would you just highly recommend try to go with formula since it's so ubiquitous with a lot of universities?
Formula and rocketry clubs are most ubiquitous for SpaceX. I know SpaceX has said publicly that they look out for Formula SAE. Honestly, any project that is too complex where you can't do it on your own is great experience to have. Yeah, I think formula, rocketry, and solar car are the big ones that stand out to me.
All right. And Spooky Emily asks, what sort of questions did you ask applicants during interviews?
I would drill down on the resume into technical depth to understand if they knew what they were talking about. So if somebody put that they made an STM32 board talking to like a high-speed image sensor, then I might like drill down into, do they understand why they might need controlled impedance traces on the board? And I would keep asking questions deeper and deeper until I got to the understanding what they actually did. But I've learned interviewing people on the phone is like really tricky. It's really hard to get a feel for somebody in just like a 30-minute conversation. The best things that helped me were pictures or videos or like a personal website, something that I could look at before and get a better feel for what they did other than just like words on a page.
Do you think you would have appreciated if someone had provided a portfolio? Was that something y'all allowed to be uploaded, or would you have minded if they asked you during the interview, can I send you something afterwards? That would be a visual representation, some photos, maybe a snippet of a document, anything like that.
Yeah, that's awesome. What I've seen a lot are GitHub links, personal websites. I mean, even something like a share link to a Google Drive is fine. I think we have a PDF upload page for a cover letter or also a portfolio. Yeah, I would highly encourage it. And following up is always okay, unless somebody tells you it's not. Especially with engineers who are like really busy and just have like a 30-minute window. Sometimes the ball gets dropped and they don't follow up when they should. So it's always good to be the squeaky wheel.
Yeah, squeaky wheels get oil, right?
A couple of times when I've interviewed somebody, I haven't even had enough time in my day to go through their entire resume and figure out what I think is most relevant to look at. So I've just kind of looked at the top half. So there's even been scenarios where I've needed an applicant to point out to me what was most important on the resume that they wanted to talk about and wanted to highlight.
So I guess to that note, kind of plugging Resumania a little bit, would you say you're in favor of having most relevant information up top rather than listing your experience in chronological order?
Yeah, definitely. I would definitely do most relevant up top.
Awesome. Mustang Steve asks, as industry and the tech that it requires evolves, how do you keep up?
It depends on what your role is. A lot of the jobs that we had, a lot of the projects I worked on didn't require you to keep up year to year with the latest technology. For example, electrical engineering, I didn't need to know the fastest microprocessor in my phone every year to understand how a 10-year-old Cortex M4 processor worked. So it wasn't necessarily about keeping up with the latest technology as understanding some more of the basics about like how does a microprocessor work? How does an analog to digital converter work? Not just how does the latest and greatest like 24-bit fancy ADC actually function?
I guess to expand on that question a little bit, my work leans a little more on the structural side. And so 15, 20 years ago, everyone was using AutoCAD. Everyone was emailing or sometimes physically mailing and faxing physical drawings. Nowadays, people really, really want 3D models. So we've had to adapt in switching from a 2D environment to a 3D environment. Is there anything kind of like that you've experienced where you've had to kind of adapt to what your, I guess for SpaceX, what your requirements were advancing towards?
Oh man, 2D to 3D. It's almost like if somebody tried to make a circuit board with like taping out all the traces and was like, hey, can you convert this to CAD?
Yeah, that might be a bit of a dramatic
Yeah.
example for an electrical engineer. But I just wanted to kind of flesh out the question a little bit more in case you might have something to add. If not, that's fine.
Yeah, none like that I can think of. Although a lot of the engineering technology we were using, although it was, although I would consider it like somewhat old, like it might be a 10-year-old processor for space launch vehicles, that might be actually like very new, or it might not be using like a 30-year-old like radiation hardened processor that was designed in the 90s. So it's kind of, I guess, not as new for SpaceX, but maybe new for other aerospace companies. Although anybody coming out of school, if you told them that they had to design a circuit board with like a 90s processor, they probably wouldn't be very happy with you.
Yeah, I had some friends who were electrical engineering students, and I think they actually had projects similar to that they weren't very happy about.
I found that those projects tend to be more the sustaining engineer roles, where you're not being asked to design or build something new with old technology. You're being asked to like make an incremental drawing release, or keep a machine running to keep the production line up. Those jobs seem a lot more plentiful than new harder design roles. At the same time, they can kind of be a trap because nobody wants to entirely design something new from scratch.
Yeah.
But if you have one of those jobs, you may not be like learning as much as you could.
Okay. L. Thorne asks, with the intensity of SpaceX, have you experienced much burnout?
Oh yeah, definitely. The first year, I don't remember coming home. I don't remember leaving office before 7 my first year, and I started feeling symptoms of burnout probably like 12 months in. Started like affecting my sleep. Wasn't able to like work as well in the morning. Had a hard time waking up. Eventually got so bad that I had to take time off from work. Thankfully, my boss was understanding enough that they let me take some time off and come back to another position. That was a scenario of me not really understanding my own limits of how much I could work. There's one period where I was in the office 30 days straight, and I didn't have anybody to tell me that wasn't normal and that I shouldn't necessarily be doing that. Because the carrots and sticks are set up at SpaceX where you're encouraged to work as much as you can. Nobody will really tell you to go home. So I would say try to find out what your limits are and what you're comfortable with working, and try to like interrupt yourself to the point before burnout becomes a problem. I think everybody's going to go through that at some point in their career, and I noticed a lot of engineers, it kind of ebbs and flows with some weeks you want to work crazy hard to get a deadline through. You want to work really long hours because you're in lockstep with the project and you're getting a lot of fulfillment out of it. And the next week you might be like, oh crap, this is just a job. I'm just doing paperwork. I just want to do the 9 to 5. But consider like what your average is and have some metric that you can use to plot it over time so that you can sort of identify when you're working more than you should and we should try to back off.
I think that's good advice. Thank you. See, for electrical for electrical engineers who want to work at SpaceX, do you have any recommended resources for learning about radiation hardened electronics, as well as safety critical / redundancy, voting versus lockstep design?
Oh, I wish I did. I don't have any off the top of my head for radiation hardened or fault tolerant electronics. Most of what I learned is from other engineers or looking at other designs. So I don't have any recommendations for that. I'm sure there are out there. I'm sure a Google search could probably turn some up, but none that I can think of.
We'll get your trade secrets out of you sooner or later. All right. Ada Cooks Fruit Loops asks, if a tech position is not a priority interest, are there internship opportunities for chemical engineers or those from heavy chemical/biochemical backgrounds without actually going into combustion or composites?
I'd say look at the SpaceX careers website and see if there are any that seem relevant. Biochemical, none come off the top of my head. There is a materials group that I know of, might be relevant. Also, every vehicle has batteries, right? Because it doesn't have any wires. That's all chemical energy storage. And on the biological side, there are life support systems that have to keep humans alive in a capsule in orbit. So it might be related. Probably nothing like you would find in like a large like chemical factory. That might be like directly relevant. But I would say poke around on the careers website and see if there's any that come up. They're like always updating that section, and SpaceX is always hiring.
All right. Mustang Steve asks, who is the most inspiring engineer that you've met at SpaceX?
There's been a lot. One of the most impactful to me was Hans Koenigsmann. I don't know if anybody's familiar with him. He was a VP of flight reliability, and was a VP of avionics. I remember once I had to do a presentation to him about, basically came down to whether or not we should launch the rocket or not. And he turned to me and asked if I was going to sleep well the night before the launch. And I was like, oh yeah, I'm going to sleep great. I did everything that I could for this problem. And I was impressed by his ability to like distill all my concerns down into one question.
Yeah, I think that's a good attitude. See, Laz asks, what's the culture at SpaceX like? Is it a shirt and tie kind of place or jeans and t-shirt? And what do you prefer? Would you have liked to have made any changes to the culture?
That's a deep question. It's not a shirt and tie place. There's really no dress code at SpaceX. As far as what I changed about the culture, it's hard to say because there's always things that you don't like about your job. But when I look back at what would I change about it, I'm not entirely sure what that would be. Personally, having like gone through the go back to burnout problem, wish there was somebody who stepped in earlier to sort of give a bird's eye view of like how much I was working and pointing that out for me that was not healthy would have been useful. But as far as like things how it changed about the culture, it's there's nothing that really comes to mind. I mean, when people ask me what was the culture like at SpaceX, I just think about the handful of team members that I worked with. Because even though SpaceX is a pretty large organization, I just think of like the few engineers that I worked with face to face, and they were really all awesome, wonderful people.
That is good to hear. Mustang Steve asked, in talking with retired engineers, some of them have spent most of their career in one or two sites within the same company. This trend appears to be shifting to people making changes at 5, 10, or 20-year marks. What's your threshold for when a role just doesn't do it for you anymore?
My personal threshold was 5 years. That was when I left and I started looking at other opportunities. It just comes down to the person of like what you're interested in. Companies definitely incentivize people to stay for shorter durations. Companies don't have 20 or 30-year pensions that only pay out if you stay with the company forever. A typical tech vest might be like twice your salary vesting over 4 or 5 years. So if you just look at what what vesting options do tech companies give you? It seems like they expect you to stay the 4 or 5 year part and then switch over.
Thank you. Lance Bantoto asks, professionally/technically, how have you grown as an electrical engineer at SpaceX? And what were the main technical skills you developed and gained during your time there?
The biggest things I learned were just how to talk to other people and how to work on a team. And what that looked like for me was sort of came down to simple stuff. How do you write an email? How do you lead a meeting? How do you write an agenda? How do you make sure that you're going to follow up with people and action items at the end of the tag up? Which none of those are really like technical skills. Most of them are just like sort of communications 101 things. But those were like the most important for me. Technically, for me, the most important thing was learning how to design and get a circuit board built, and actually get it, actually see it fly. Because there's like 1,000 things that have to go right for all that to happen.
Goder asks, when interviewing an applicant, what would be your preferred response to if someone doesn't know the answer to your question? They're assuming I don't know is best, but would you appreciate a guess behind the I don't know and the person's reasoning behind it, or just leave it at that?
Saying you don't know something is okay. If you have a guess and you have like an idea how to back it up, or you can explain your thought process, that's fine. But saying I don't know is okay. A good interviewer expects that you are like stressed out of your mind when you're on these technical calls. So saying I don't know is usually okay. Kind of depends on what the question is, right? Like if somebody's asking you like a circuits basics, like a basic circuits question, like what is Ohm's law? You should probably be able to recite that. If they're asking you for like I don't know, some other like way more complicated question, and they're kind of like digging in your resume, saying you're not sure is better than just giving a wrong answer. So I think it's more important to like discern what are the basic types of questions that you should be able to answer, and what's anything beyond that. If you're not sure, just own up to it.
Integral asks, if one does mostly hardware or slash firmware R&D testing at your current position, but wants to get an entry-level firmware position, what should one do? I think there might be a typo there because you're suggesting someone who's already doing firmware wants to move into firmware. Evan, do you understand the question all right?
Yeah, it sounds like the question is, if you were trying to move to a new technical role, such as a firmware position, what's the best way to transfer? I would try to do a project in either on company time. Is there like a firmware type project that your boss is willing to give you if it's something that's like not as critical or something that the company can afford for you to screw up on, or do it on your personal time? So if you're doing just harder jobs and you want to do a firmware position, go buy a development board and get an RTOS running on it and show that you can talk to all the different peripherals using some C firmware, and then put your code on a GitHub and use that as like leverage to show that you can do the job.
Lance Bantoto asks, if you could go back in time to when you were in senior year of college, what would you tell yourself, knowing all that you know now?
Ooh, what would I tell myself? Work less. Yeah, definitely work less. I'm gonna be working for like 20 or 30 years. So I was gonna like kill myself over it for the first few. I would also say look for technical mentors and look for more generic career mentors and understand the difference between the two. So try to find somebody in your network that's in your company, or somebody like a STEM network Discord that you can ask career advice questions from. Usually those two will not be your direct boss. It can be, but it doesn't necessarily have to be. So maybe questions like, I've been here 2 years. Are there other jobs at the company that I could switch and plot in your career for? Or a technical question like, owning it is something you're really struggling about that you may not feel comfortable sharing with people on your direct team. And personally, those two I've not seen those be offered automatically with a job. Those have been things that I've had to reach out for. And often it's just been asking another person directly if they want to meet up for lunch, something like that.
Okay. I just want to take a moment to thank everyone for keeping the thread nice and orderly. It's been easy on me to go through question by question and read this, and I appreciate that. Reminder to specify at the beginning of your question, TQ if you don't mind me reading it out, or MQ if you would like to have yourself unmuted and speak with Evan yourself. That being said, the next question is from Ailthorn. You mentioned that your threshold was 5 years and then reevaluate the situation, referring to moving between careers.
Yeah.
Is this a time where you look for a promotion within SpaceX, i.e. a different project or team, or is this more of a look at different companies to make a leap in salary/promotions?
Both. For me, it was, what do I want to do day to day? Like, what are the things I don't like about my job that I want to change? I actually did a lateral technical swap 2 years in, from hardware design to avionics test. And now I want to go more vertical and be able to lead a team. So I think one of them was I found a role inside the company that I wanted to do something different technically with a better work-life balance. And now I want to switch to a different type of company and in a much different type of role.
All right. Integral asks, when doing a personal firmware development project, does it matter what peripherals one uses, or is the main point to showcase original work using I2C, SPI, etc.?
Yeah, I2C and Inspire are great. I'd say it doesn't even have to be showing all the peripherals used doesn't matter, and whether it's entirely original doesn't matter either. A lot of firmware development is being able to use somebody else's hardware abstraction layer driver set. I think the most important thing is being able to physically build something and have a deliverable at the end of the project. So being able to let's say I2C example, being able to read an I2C temperature sensor on a circuit board you designed, and being able to build that thing and write the firmware for it, and be able to say, okay, I designed a remote temperature sensor that I can use to monitor my car's, say, windshield temperature, so I know when to turn on the defroster, is more impressive than saying, oh, I wrote this this unique DMA abstraction layer for my A7 processor, but I just wrote the firmware and I didn't actually get it on a board. So I would push more towards do the simple thing and get it done over a more complicated peripheral.
Thank you. And Chupa Chupa asks, what are you looking for now in terms of career, I assume? Something slower, something outside of aerospace, so on and so forth?
So now I'm going to a smaller company with more varied projects and a role that I can have a wider variety of technical topics to do. And I'm also looking more towards potential leadership roles in the future.
And I do think you mentioned that you were looking to move a little more vertical. Is that right?
Yeah, which I think is probably easier to do at a smaller company that's trying to grow. At some companies, your vertical options can be limited. For example, if you have run a small team and in a big company, you may not be able to grow vertically until like your manager transitioned off of their role. So if your options are limited there, then you might have to go like laterally to another team. But if there's a company that's growing a ton, then there's generally going to be more room for those types of roles to come up.
Lance asks, if you could work at any company after SpaceX, which companies would you want to work for? What companies and industries do you think are doing interesting work / would recommend new electrical engineers go into, given what you know about the aerospace industry in general?
Personally, I think I'm done with the pure aerospace for now. It's hard for me to say what other aerospace company I would go to. Say the dream company I want to go to is one I'm going to now, which is like a small engineering consulting company that does a huge variety of different work. So it's a job where I might be working on like an RF project one day, a battery powered wearable on another, which is a lot more varied than I might get in the aerospace industry. The other parallel I've seen a lot of engineers do is go like the startup, run your own company method. People who want to do more of the like business development side of it.
All right. Well, we might get one or two more questions trickling in here at the end, but right now I'm at the end of my list. There we go. One more question. For choosing a master's degree with the goal of bettering a firmware development career, is a computer engineering master's a computer science master's or an electrical engineering master's with the target domain knowledge, i.e. power electronics concentration, for converter control firmware, the best choice? I guess to make it a little more general, someone who's pursuing higher education, is there something in particular you would recommend for your field, that is?
It depends a lot on what type of job you want to do. I will say most of the people I worked with either didn't have a master's or their master's wasn't totally relevant to what they do. Like speaking about firmware specifically, I don't know what master's program you'd go into that would make you a better firmware engineer than 2 years of writing firmware projects. Personally, I would only do a master's program if it was something that I was deeply interested in, not just something to put on a resume. But a lot of it depends on what type of job you're looking for. Power electronics, like they mentioned, is one example where potentially a master's program could help. Going back to what are these tech companies looking for, a lot of time it's the hands-on experience. So for power electronics, you've designed a bunch of power converters and you've actually built them yourself. Building more simple converters, but actually having them in your hand might be more impressive than doing like a master's thesis on some other theoretical converter type.
All right. And changing tones a little bit here, how's your social life? And did SpaceX affect it drastically? I guess both joining and leaving SpaceX.
I had a pretty good social life living in LA, but oddly enough, most of the people I hung out with weren't coworkers. I've met most of the people I knew through having a couple dogs and meeting them like at dog parks and around the neighborhood. Thankfully, Emily has like kept me grounded a lot by inviting friends over and reminding me, hey, Evan, we have people coming over at 6. You better be out. So I'm really thankful that I have somebody who can remind me that social events are important to go to. But now that we moved from LA to Seattle, and I gotta go through the whole process of meeting new people again. So if anybody's in Seattle, let me know. Looking for friends.
Yeah, I'm sure plenty of people here are mildly cringing at the thought of having to go out and make a bunch of new friends, socializing and all that.
Yeah, if we didn't have dogs, I don't know how I would have met new people.
So that's your one piece of advice then. If you take anything from tonight, it's that everyone should get a dog.
Yes, exactly. Everyone should get a dog.
Let's see. Skunkamunka asks, how close are we to asteroid mining? I guess just in your opinion.
Let's see what has to go right for somebody to mine an asteroid. If it's robotic, I think we're probably pretty close. You look at NASA's putting together a Mars sample return mission. I don't remember the timeline. Is it 5 to 10 years? So asteroid mining is probably not far off. If it's something more like the what is that movie Armageddon, where you send a bunch of miners over to an asteroid, I don't see that happening anytime soon.
Yeah, I think that that sounds sensible. Isn't there a company or two whose mission statement is to mine asteroids? I might be thinking of now defunct companies, but I thought that used to be a thing.
I remember there was one I heard about like 5 years ago. I don't remember the name or if anything came of it.
NASA sent a mission to an asteroid Bennu called OSIRIS-REx. That was to take samples from the asteroid and bring them back.
There you go. Is that mining?
Yeah, sounds like mining to me.
Yeah, sounds close enough to me.
Yeah, and we're kind of doing that with Mars right now. We're leaving samples behind, and I think we have yet to launch the mission that'll go to pick it up, but they're there.
Planetary Resources was the one that I was thinking of, and I think they're now defunct.
Oh, I hope not. I think that's the one I had in mind too.
Yeah, I just Wikipedia'd them. They were purchased by a blockchain software company.
Oh no!
So that should tell you all you need to know. You heard it here. Asteroid mining, it's all hype.
I guess stop the presses. Literally, if it's just hype, just stop the presses. Don't need it. I think we're getting one more question in, and then after that, I'll advise anyone who might have follow-up questions to leave them here in the thread. It will remain open for 24 hours after the most recent activity. So you can always come back to the thread and ask a question. If the thread's closed, if you think of something next Thursday, you're getting out of the shower and you're like, oh, that's a good question, by all means, come back to the large meeting room or ping someone in the event staff and say, hey, who was that person who presented? And we'll see if we can't get that question forwarded to Evan. And Chupa Chupa asks, how many times have you or a team failed meeting the deadline? Did any repercussions occur?
How many times have I failed meeting a deadline? A lot. Was the deadline reasonable? Maybe not. Repercussions, mostly just coming up with working up a plan to get back on track. Yeah, deadlines are always what's the quote? Planning is important, or you need to have a plan, but a plan isn't useful. I think I'm butchering it, but yeah, I've missed plenty of deadlines. Usually the repercussion is just you got to spend more time and work a little bit harder to figure out how you're gonna recover.
Lance suggests plans are of little importance, but planning is essential.
Yes, that is what I was thinking of. Thank you, Lance.
And then I have a follow-up question for you, which would be, have you ever been given a deadline that you knew right away you wouldn't be able to meet? And if so, how did you deal with that?
Yeah, SpaceX is kind of famous for that, for having almost impossible deadlines that you don't think are realistic, but still striving to meet them. A lot of it comes down to forcing yourself to think through every contingency and what you're going to do if something doesn't go right. So if you have a project that's going to take anywhere from 3 weeks to 3 months, and you're asked to do it in exactly 3 weeks, then the planning process can force you to think through what are all things that could go wrong that cause the project to slip. So often I have tried to strive to meet those deadlines, even if I don't think that they're realistic. Going through the planning process has been more important than stressing over meeting it.
I like that. Keep your eyes on the prize, so to speak.
Yep.
All right. Well, I think that's going to be the end of our questions. So on behalf of everyone here, thank you very, very much for being here tonight, for setting up this presentation, and for taking all of these questions. You've been very patient with that, and I know everyone here appreciates that. Again, to everyone else, if you have any follow-up questions, you're free to put them in the thread or after it archives, just in the large meeting room or somewhere else, and make sure to ping us, and we'll try and get that answered for you. But for tonight, Evan, I think we should let you go. Again, thank you for your time, and you're always welcome to come back and give another presentation, I am sure. Mustang Steve says thank you. You've offered a lot of great insight. For everyone else, again, a reminder that this session, this event has been recorded and it will be uploaded to our YouTube channel. We'll post an announcement in our announcements channel with a link to that when it is online. If y'all enjoyed tonight, if you like listening to all these questions and answers, if you like being able to pick Evan's brain, then this is something we try to do monthly, having engineers from industry come in and give these presentations. So you're always welcome to come back next month and the month after that and do it again.
Thanks, Chase. It's been great talking to everybody.
Yeah. And that's all I really have to say, other than just unending appreciation for you being here tonight, Evan. With that, I think we can call this an end, and we'll stop recording about here.
Great. Thanks.